So this is exam 1 review session. It's going to cover the intro chapter, as well as the chemistry, the cells, the tissues or histology, and the integumentary system, otherwise skin. It also includes nail and hair. Okay, so I want to go through some logistics first, and then we'll go through right into the content. And again, anytime you have a question, you don't have to raise your hand on the Zoom, just jump in and chat, okay? So some logistics. Both exams require respondus lockdown. So hopefully you've been practicing on when you take the quizzes. Lockdown. And they both require your webcam to be on. Now, not only does your webcam have to be on, but you also want to make sure that you do a thorough environmental scan. And in the email I sent out to everyone, I gave an example of what an environmental scan looks like. Right? And this is not for me, but it's more for you, because if respondus lockdown flags you as potentially not being academically honest, the environmental scan goes a long way to help. So the environmental scan, you want to make sure that you scan, particularly, so if this is your laptop, I want to see all of this space right here. Okay, so on your right or left and right in front of you. Okay, it's just to make sure that this whole area, and it should be clear. You shouldn't have anything around you, and definitely no cell phones. Okay. And if you have a mirror in the back, that will also be more for your protection. Okay. Now, I will say that I don't watch any of these unless respondus lockdown flags you. Okay. So unless respondus lockdown flags you, you don't have to worry. I do not watch your videos at all. It takes a long time, and I prefer not to watch them unless I have to. So respondus lockdown pays attention to whether you're in the screen or not. So here's your face, your hair, okay? Make sure your face is in the screen. Make sure you do a proper environmental scan, and that should be it. Don't be nervous about it. Again, I don't watch it at all unless it flags you.
Professor
Bo, if it does flag you, the environmental scan goes a long way to say, nope, I didn't have anything around me, so I could not have been doing anything wrong. Questions?
Yes, Professor Vu, this is Jamie Finch. Quick question. Yes. If I've been doing the environmental scan and so forth, every quiz, and then nothing's ever been flagged, does that mean that what I've been doing is correct? I mean, I'm doing it all the way around, 360, up and down, around, even more so than what you're asking. So if I would have already been flagged, right? I would think.
Right, exactly.
Okay, cool.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Other questions?
Similar to the previous question. So I guess with the, because I do a similar thing where I even kind of record what's under the table and whatnot.
Perfect.
Yeah, okay.
Yep, because there's some, 1 year I had a student that had their cell phone kind of underneath between their legs, their lap, and respondus has a way of finding whether you're looking down all the time in one place or not. So just be honest. I'm assuming that everyone's going to be honest. So yeah, I don't, and then there won't be any problems. And unfortunately, if you are flagged, and I do find that there is potential academic dishonesty, not only will you have a 0 on that exam and you can't repeat it, I unfortunately have to report you to the academic dean. So just do the right thing. Other questions?
One other question, Dr. Vu. So there's times when, I guess it's just my experience as a student. When I can't think of something, I tend to look upwards.
Mm-hmm.
Is that okay? Or when I scratch my face, trying to remember something?
If you know that that's your tendency, scan upwards. Whatever your tendency, that video, that environmental scan really is meant to protect you. and not for me to invade into your space. Again, I don't watch them unless, you know,
Okay.
yeah.
All right.
Great questions. Okay. So then for exam, the lecture exam. So the lecture exam, just like in my email, has 50 questions. Of the 50 questions, 40 of them are multiple choice, very similar to your quizzes, and 10 of them are fill in the blanks. So there's no key, there's no like word key or anything. It's just fill in the blank, and you have to type the answer in according to what the question is. Okay, questions.
How much time do we have, Professor?
I believe you have 15 minutes.
So 1 minute per question?
Yep. Yep.
All right.
Yeah, and I actually did measure how much students take on the exam. It's like 80% take less than the time that they're given. Yeah, but all students are different, right? You make sure you do use the maximum amount of time. And actually, oftentimes the problem when students don't do well is that they take it too fast. They don't process the question. So what I recommend you to do, if I were to take this test, I would read the questions out loud to help me slow down, because it's not like a paper exam where you can like trace with your fingers. I would read the questions out loud to help me process it, and then read the answer options and then select. Okay, you are free to read it out loud. It's scanning you, but you know, I don't really care. And you are free to have a piece of paper, as long as you in the environmental scan, you show me the front and back is blank. Okay, so you can, you know, use that blank piece of paper as you're taking the exam. Okay, now when you, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry, real fast, please. Are we allowed to go backwards and forwards like we were during the quizzes? If we want to go
Yes,
back?
you are, but here, that's
Okay,
a
good.
great question, actually. Thank you for
Thank
that
That's my
question.
question too.
Yeah, that's a perfect question. You are allowed to go back and forth. However, I do not recommend you going through the entire exam and then going back to answer them, because here's the reason why. If you go through the entire exam and something happens and the computer kicks you out, I can't let you go back in because you've seen all the questions. Okay, so the strategy, the best thing to do is go from one question, answer it, then the next, and then answer it. And then if something happens, should a technology issue happen and you get kicked out, I can go, okay, they only saw up to question 5. I can let them go back in and continue from 6 onward.
Gotcha.
But if you've
Thank
seen
you.
the entire exam, I can't let you know, even if you had technical issues, I can't help with that.
Right.
Make sense? Okay, so
Makes
the
sense.
strategy I would say is to, whatever question you see, answer it before you move on to the next one.
Thank you.
Yep. I thought I heard another question though.
I think you just answered mine. It's just that it's going to, the questions are going to appear one at a time, just like they do with the quizzes. So we'll hit next and you'll get the next question after that.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. Now, when you see these 50 questions, I'm not here to trick you. So what you'll often find is that the first 10 questions will be on chapter 1. The next set of questions will be on the next chapter. So I kind of group them together rather than like putting them randomly. Okay. So they are grouped: intro, next set will be chem, next set will be cells, next set will be tissues, next set will be integumentary. Okay, so hopefully that helps you, you know, not reduce the anxiety a little bit of like, oh no, what is this on? So, you know, that should help a little bit. What else do I need to tell you about it? I think that's it for the lecture exam. 40 multiple choice, 10 fill in the blank. Yeah, okay. Then for the lab exam has 30 questions. And they are just like your quiz. As a matter of fact, whatever you see in your quiz, you most likely may potentially see on your lab, because it's taken from the same pool questions. Okay, so this one you have to type in the answer. Okay, you have to identify the structure or whatever the question is. Spelling counts just like your quizzes. And make sure if there's a pair of something, you always include whether it's the right or left. Okay, questions?
Dr. Vu, can you talk about the last part? You said, like for example, like you said, it's right or left. So, could like let's say if you give a picture of like an arm, so I'll say right brachial if it's on the right side.
Oh, you know what? You're not at the point where you need to distinguish right and left yet, because you're only on the skeletal. So never mind that. It's when you get to like the kidneys, there's two kidneys, then you have to identify which one's the right kidney, which one's the left kidney.
Okay.
Yeah, but for now, I don't think you have to do right or left yet. No, not skeletal. So you're fine. Spelling counts. Type in the answer. Yeah, other questions?
So for the lab test, just focus on the the usual lab worksheets that we have, right?
Yep.
Got it.
Okay.
Is that 30 questions in 30 minutes, or is that, I'm assuming?
You know, I have to double check, but I think there's a minimum of 30 minutes. I think it may have changed to 45 minutes, but let me double check. But I know it used to be 30 minutes as well. So one minute per question.
You mean max of okay, well, yeah.
Was this for
Max.
regarding the lab exam time?
Yes.
The syllabus said 45 minutes.
There you go. Thank you. I knew we changed it, but I wasn't sure. So I didn't want to promise something and then give you a worse scenario. Okay. So if it says 45 minutes, then you have 45 minutes.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Other questions? Any questions at all? I'm here to ease your mind.
Will you be releasing our quizzes from last week?
The ones that you just took?
Yes.
Yes. So I already released the lecture one. I have to manually grade the lab one, but that should come out on Tuesday. Actually, all of your grades should be coming out in the next few days.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
Professor, quick question.
Yeah.
How do you check the previous quizzes? I usually don't check it because I just I do well on them, but then if I want to check it, like how do I do it?
Yeah. Any quiz that you've taken, you can always go back to look at them. You have to use Respondus Lockdown to open them.
I got it. Thank you.
Yep. But you will always be able to access any prior quiz or exams you've taken. The correct answer will not show. The correct answer only shows to up to 48 hours after I release the grades. But the quiz itself, you will always be able to see.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Yes, I have a question. If we go and look at those questions on Respondus Lockdown, that means that we need to do also the environmental scan, and we're not writing down anything about what the questions are and so forth.
No,
is that correct?
I haven't heard that
No.
you have to do. Yeah, that's a great question, Jamie. Okay. I don't have the student view, so I'm not 100% sure on this. So if someone in the class has already looked at your quizzes, will you chime in?
I have.
You don't have to do
the environmental scan to review your quiz notes. So I mean, I make notes on anything that I would get wrong so that I can review those things and just kind of do a mental check of the things that I got right so I don't forget. But there's no environmental scan needed for the review of the answers.
Perfect. Thank you.
And that's exactly what I would recommend you do. That's why you have the quizzes. They're meant to help you see what you know from what you don't know. And they're low, they're not worth a lot of points. So that's the learning you do from it. And so just do exactly what she did. So whatever you didn't get right, write it down, study it a little bit more so that it helps prepare you for the exam. Other questions before I move on? Okay, so just kind of repeat of everything I said. Content, the lecture exam includes intro, chem, cells, tissues, and tag. Lab information includes the intro terms, so make sure you have those terms memorized. The cells as well as the tissues. Time frame, you have 1 minute per question. This is now updated to 45 minutes. Okay. Logistics, you need the respondent's lockdown, webcam. Exams cannot be graded unless you've done a thorough environmental scan. During the exam, your face must be in the screen the entire time. And then troubleshooting, here's an important one, troubleshooting. Okay, use your practice quiz before you take the exam. That's just to make sure that your computer still is compatible, respondent's lockdown still works, webcam still works, and everything is nice and stable, okay? If there is technical difficulties, please do not wait until the last minute to take the exams. You're more likely to get a response from me earlier on during the day than 50 minutes before the exam closes, okay? Stay calm. If anything happens, just text me. You have my cell phone number, and just text me and I will respond. We'll figure out what happened and then we'll get you back in, okay? If it's something that I can allow you to go back in for. Recommendations, I emailed you about the 5-day plan, spread it out. You know, if you try to learn anatomy, physiology, because it's a lot of stuff, all in one sitting, it's not gonna work. You know, spread it out through 5-day, day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5, and then your exam day. Okay, usually what I recommend is studying the oldest materials first because they tend to be furthest away from your memory. So either study the oldest material first or study the hardest material first. Because, you know, I understand sometimes when I'm studying, I tend to study the things that I understand and not the things I don't. But then when I wait too long, there's not enough time to process the harder materials. So I really recommend you studying either the oldest material first, up to the newest, or the hardest material first. And for me personally, I found that this is most helpful because sometimes you just need a little bit more time to study the hardest materials. Okay. So when you're studying, make sure you assess and review. Okay. In other words, don't just read, you know, do something to quiz yourself to gauge your understanding. Use the test taking strategies. There should be a video that I sent in an email for you to watch on test taking strategies. Study the oldest material or the hardest material and study complete chapters. Don't skip around because it can be confusing if you go from chapter to chapter to chapter. Okay, questions? Yeah, go ahead.
Is there a chance that maybe you will pick questions for the exam from the book?
No, not at all.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. All the questions are written by several of the faculty that teach this course, and it's a pool. So I really don't know what questions you'll get. It makes sure that each of the units that you study are covered in that exam. Okay, so that's why I can't tell you what to focus on. You have to know everything because the exams are randomized per student. Okay, other questions? Okay.
Oh, one question, Professor. So what I plan to do is like study from today till like Saturday, and then maybe take the exam on Monday. What's your opinion on that?
That's fine. Whatever works for you, but just really try to stay away from that like 10 to midnight, 10 to 11 p.m. Central Standard Time Monday. It's so late. You're not likely to get help if something happens. So just try really hard to take it before 10 p.m.
Okay. And do you recommend taking it like one after the other, like lecture and lab, or maybe lab one day, lecture the other?
That's a great question, Aaron. I forgot to talk about that. Thank you. So the exams, you do not have to take it right next to each other. You can take one on one day and one on another day, one on one day, and then 5 hours later you can take the other one. You can take it anytime within that range. And as for what I recommend, I would say it's your first exam, try something. Next exam, try, if it works, keep it. If it doesn't, try something else. But I like to take the lab exam first because it's the easiest one. And then I take the lecture exam.
Okay.
because it's a little bit harder, right?
I'm
Because you've seen that.
definitely with you, Professor Vu, with that, and I found that that's actually been really helpful. If anyone else has done that, to take the lab first, and then I'll give myself a little bit of a break to let that sit in. And I found that that information is usually really helpful to me when I do the lecture, as far as kind of like synthesizing things. So yeah, it gives the mind a little break there.
Perfect. And thank you for chiming in. Anyone with experience, chime in, because you can help each other more than I can help you. Okay. Any
One point
questions
of
before I move on?
Yes, one point of clarification, please. You said that you said that none of the questions are going to be coming from the book, but you said that you put together a pool of questions from other people that professors there that teach the course. Exactly, I'm kind of confused by what you mean. I mean, these are not questions that are coming from you. These are questions that are coming from other people that taught the class at other times, or what?
We all contributed questions. So I contribute some questions, others, but all of our pool questions come from your lecture content. So your lecture video.
Okay. So it's not like
scripts.
Gotcha.
I mean, to say that it's not in the textbook is not correct, because all of the stuff that we present to you is in the textbook.
Right.
But if you've read the textbook, you'll notice that there's a heck of a lot more in the textbook than we ever talk about.
Right.
Right.
Okay,
so,
very good. Just want to clarify that.
Yep, perfect. Yep. So even though there's separate people writing the exam questions, they all come from this chunk of material.
Okay.
Yep.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. But if you're the type that reads the textbook, you still do fine, because all the stuff that we lecture on comes from the textbook. Okay? It just helps you to focus more because the textbook has so much information. Okay? All right. So just to give you an overview, the first chapter is on introduction. Make sure you understand the scientific methods section, all the terminology and their definitions. Okay? The second part is on the definition of anatomy versus physiology. The next thing you should know is the levels of hierarchy, going from, and here's one thing. You want to make sure you read the test question carefully, because on the exam, I can ask you to go from smallest to largest, or from largest to smallest. Okay, so if I'm asking you to go from smallest to largest, you would go from atom to organism. But if I were to ask you to do the reverse, from largest to smallest, then you would give me the order from organism to atoms. That's one thing. Okay, and that's pure memorization, regurgitation. The other type of question I can ask you is on critical thinking. So instead of saying atoms, molecules, organelles, cell, tissues, organ system, and organism, I can say, okay, so here's an order. You have DNA, you have a red blood cell, you have a liver. Can you put this in order of largest to smallest? So from largest to smallest, what's the first one?
Can you repeat the options, Dr. Vu?
Oh, can you see I wrote it on the board: DNA, red blood cells, and the liver.
And you said from biggest to smallest?
Yep.
So it'd be liver,
Yep.
RBC, and DNA?
Exactly. So that's the type of questions you could have. So you would have to know that a liver is an organ, a red blood cell is a cell, and DNA is a molecule. Okay. So I'm just giving you some examples of test questions that you might see and the different types, the format of questions. Okay. Make sure you understand homeostasis. A lot of things are based on homeostasis. And actually, every chapter that you go through will always have something on homeostasis. And that's why it's one of the first things that you need to learn about, and something that you need to learn really well. So be able to define homeostasis as the ability to maintain stable internal environments, negative feedback versus positive feedback, and the examples of negative feedback, the examples of positive feedback. You should know terms like dynamic equilibrium. You should know things like set points. Okay. And then all the other terminologies that, that you need to know. Questions on this? Okay. Then chemistry, for me, chemistry is the hardest topic. So whatever is the hardest, you always want to set aside more time to study. Okay. I did create several videos. If you have any questions, like how to figure out the number of atoms, whether it's neutral, how it forms ionic bonds or covalent bonds, I did create a separate video for that. So make sure you do watch those videos. So in terms of chemistry, there are a lot of terminology that you need to know. Be able to define what an atom is, give examples, be able to define an ion, and within an ion, what's the difference between a cation and an anion? Let's answer that. What are some differences between a cation and an anion?
Professor, isn't cation positive and anion negative?
Perfect. And one way, here's a strategy that you can remember. Cation has this plus sign right here. Do you see that in the T? So cations are always positive and anions are always negative. Okay? So find these little things that help you remember. Okay? Make sure you are able to define a molecule. What are solutes? What are solvents? The S ones are really hard because there's so many of them. Okay, so I would just make a little chart, a vocabulary list. You know, list all the vocabs and then their definitions. Because when you have them side by side, it's easier to distinguish them and not confuse them. Okay. Then make sure you know what molecules are. What's the difference between stable versus neutral? Know the 3 basic chemical bonds: ionic, covalent, and hydrogen. Any questions on those?
Professor, if I remember correctly, covalent has like the strongest bond because like they share electrons.
That's
Whereas,
exactly it.
Whereas ionic is weaker just because they don't exactly share, but they just kind of exchange positive and negative electrons. Whereas just hydrogen, it's water.
Yep, exactly. Very good.
Okay, I should remember. Good.
Yeah,
I
I'm
did.
glad you remember
I did
it.
have a quick question, Professor Vu.
Yes.
I haven't seen it come up on any of my quizzes per se, but in some of the PDF PowerPoint, I've noticed that they do have the structural layout of certain molecules, like for carbohydrates or certain proteins. Are we going to have to know what those structures look like? Let's say that there's like 20 CH bonds for a particular amino acid or things like that.
I have great news for you, and the answer is no.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Vu, because
You're
those were
very
hard.
welcome. Okay.
Those are really hard. I was just
They
like,
are.
man,
They
that
are.
doesn't come up for me.
And here's the thing, if you're required to take chemistry, you will have to, but this is anatomy and physiology. So we try to stick to just enough chemistry that helps you understand how the body works.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Great question, though. Anytime you have questions, this is the best time to ask them. Okay. All right. So the next one is pH scale. So pH scale is a measurement of, look, pH, H meaning hydrogen, right? So it's a measurement of hydrogen ions. The more hydrogen ions you have, the more acidic it is. Okay. The more OH you have, the more basic it is. So on a scale, on a pH scale, can you tell me the range on a pH scale?
0 to 14.
Perfect.
7 being neutral.
Beautiful. And anything below 7?
Is it basic?
Acidic.
You gotta be careful about that. It's acidic. Anything above 7?
That's your base.
Oh,
That's your
yeah.
base. Okay. You see how you made that mistake? It's very easy to make a mistake. So make
Mhm.
sure you read and think through. Everyone thinks that a minute is not a lot of time, but actually the majority of students take about 20 minutes on my exam. And I'm just like, no, you have 50 minutes. Why not take the whole time? So, be thoughtful, think it through,
Mhm.
you have time, essentially. Okay. All right. Now, the organic compounds are the ones that students have the most trouble with because it's just a lot of memorization. And that's why I have that worksheet that I require you to do. What required you to do? Do you remember that worksheet that you had to do for me? Yes.
For the
Yes.
carbohydrates.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's the
That was
cognitive map.
actually really helpful.
Yeah. The cognitive map is really helpful in multiple ways. One, it's a great study tool. And not only is it a great study tool, but having a visual of that map helps you to recall much easier. It helps with recall. Because if you're thinking about it, if you were try to recall a paragraph, it's a lot harder than to think, oh, okay, in that box I wrote this and this. So this is a type of lipid. Make sense? So having that visual, that's what a cognitive map is. Having something visual helps with your ability to recall. And that's why it's really good to start from that. If you haven't done it yet, and I know all of you should have because I've graded them, use that, over and over. And as a matter of fact, you could do another cognitive map just to test whether you know it or not. Okay? All right, so that's chemistry. Any questions on chemistry before I move on to the next chapter? All right, so here's another map, that cognitive map of the organic chemicals you can do. And I'll send this PowerPoint to everyone so you'll have it. I purposely only filled out carbohydrates. I left the others for you to fill out. But this is an example of how detailed this should be. So the organic compound is carbohydrates. What is its function? It functions as energy source, energy storage, as well as cell structures. Monosaccharides include the glucose, fructose, and galactose. Disaccharides include the sucrose, lactose, and maltose. Sucrose is formed by a glucose and a fructose. Lactose is formed by a glucose and galactose. Maltose is a glucose and a glucose. Polysaccharides, these are long chains of glucose. Long chains of glucose. It comes in three main forms: the starches, the cellulose, and the glycogen. Sample test question. Which of the following polysaccharide is ingestible but not digestible?
That was a question. Which of the polysaccharides is ingestible but not digestible?
Correct.
Cellulose?
Perfect. Okay, so that has been a test question in the past. And you can imagine that we would have test questions on starch and glycogen. So it just depends on what random pool you got. Okay. Does that make sense? Does anyone have any questions? Okay. So the next chapter is on cells, and someone requested this, so we'll spend a little bit more time. But the general overview is you want to make sure you know the structure and function. You'll find that structure and function go hand in hand. Okay? Make sure you know the plasma membrane and the mechanisms of transport. Students have difficulties on this one, so you might want to spend a little bit more time on that. What's the difference between passive and active? Within passive, what's the difference between diffusion, facilitated diffusion, osmosis, and filtration? And by the way, diffusion often goes by the term simple diffusion as well. So you've got simple diffusion, you've got facilitated diffusion, you've got osmosis and filtration. Within active, you have the vesicle transport, which includes endo and exocytosis. And then you also have the active transport itself as a mechanism. Okay. Sometimes it helps to draw it out. Like, for example, if I were to say what simple diffusion here, I would draw a membrane. And here are some solutes. Here are some over here. And what I'll do is I'll draw the solutes going this way. And it's not like all of these solutes on this side is going to move to the other side. So it's not, B is going to move to A, but not all of them, just until it reaches an equilibrium. That's simple diffusion. And it doesn't require any energy, okay? And you can even write examples. An example of this is, here's a room, right? Here's a person, and they spray perfume all over themselves. And you're standing over here. Will you eventually smell the perfume?
Yes.
Yeah, because the perfume is going to eventually diffuse over here. Because what happens is that in an area, when there's too many of something, they bump into each other and they push themselves apart. So when they push themselves apart, it spreads out. Not all of it moving to from one side to another, but until it reaches an equilibrium. And that's the reason for simple diffusion, is because these molecules, they bump into each other. So they're going to repel, they're going to push each other apart until eventually half of these are going to move over here. Okay? You can do the same example with facilitated, with osmosis, with filtration, with endo-exo, as well as active transport. Questions?
Is this what you call like moving from high concentration to low concentration?
Absolutely, and that is a characteristics of passive. Always goes from high to low. That's a great observation. So what would active be then?
It's low to high, but it requires ATP.
That's exactly why. It's going from low to where it's high, so it will require ATP. Okay? Then make sure you know the organelles. And I have a separate sheet for organelles, so I'm going to go through that right now. You had to do a video on this. It's nice to this is what I did in my in-person class. I just drew a cell, I labeled, and as I labeled, I wrote down what their functions are. Okay? Practice doing this. See, and you should do this once with no notes to see what do you remember. Do it another time in a different color using your notes. Why? Because it's going to allow you to know what you know from what you don't know. Okay? So I have the nucleus, I have its function, it's the control center, contains genetic information. I have the rough endoplasmic reticulum, consists of cisternae, that's the name of the membrane. It's a network of channels that transport proteins, where the smooth endoplasmic reticulum also consists of cisternae, but it has no ribosomes. And its function, and here's where a few of you got this wrong on your video. It has several functions. It detoxifies alcohol and drugs, it stores minerals like calcium, and it synthesizes lipids. Okay, so practice doing this cognitive map. So I think one of you asked, what's the difference between studying smart versus studying hard? This is studying smart. Studying hard would be just reading about it, because you're going to have to read it 10 times to remember it, versus if you do this a few times, you'll remember it more easily. If you draw it out yourself, you label it, and you define it. Questions?
Professor Vu, will you be releasing, because I don't think I saw this, the grades for the videos before the exam, or is that just still in the process right now?
Nope, they will all be released before your exam. Yep. But I pretty much, if you've done it and you followed the criteria, I give you perfect scores. So it's best to read the feedback that you give to, because the video is meant for peer-to-peer feedback, so I don't really like go through the details on that. I just kind of go, okay. Several students got this wrong, so I should, I noted a little bit in this review session, but I don't grade it on whether you have it wrong or not, because that's that is I'm purposely letting you do peer feedback for that one. So if you did it and you have a visual, audio, you commented on 2, you got perfect scores. Even though you may have made mistakes on there, hopefully your peers caught that for you. Okay? Questions? And hopefully you've had fun watching each other's videos, because sometimes you may learn better from your peers than from me, or certain areas you'll learn better from me, certain areas you learn better from your peers. And that's why we have, the video discussions. All right. So tissue, histology, same thing. Make sure you know the structure, the functions. There are 4 types of tissue that you learned about: epithelium, connective, muscular, and nervous. We did cover muscular and nervous very briefly, but because they have their own chapters, I really focus on epithelium and connective. Okay, so make sure you know the epithelium and connective really well, and then the like paragraph that I wrote about muscular and nervous that you had to know. Okay, the best way to study this is by doing those cognitive maps. Okay, so let's go through an example of one. So here's one that I presented to my class. Can everyone see it okay, or is it too dark?
A little bit dark, Professor.
Okay, so I don't quite know how to line it up, but I will send this to I'll send this PowerPoint to all of you, so you can expand it, make it larger. But hopefully you can see a little bit about here. Let me see if I can go into presentation mode. Hold on. Does that help?
Yes.
Yes.
Perfect. So here's a cognitive map that I created for my in-person class. So you can see of the tissues, there are 4 main types: epithelial, connective, nervous, and muscular. I spent very little time on nervous. Pretty much make sure you know the characteristics, the function, and then there's 2 basic types. They're neurons and nerve glial cells. For muscular, basically know their characteristics is striated, it is multinucleated, it is all the characteristics that you need to know about that. Then make sure you know the function, and it's based on whether it's voluntary, involuntary, striated, or non-striated. So some unique characteristics to skeletal versus cardiac versus smooth. So both cardiac and skeletal would be striated, where the only one that's not striated would be smooth. In terms of voluntary versus involuntary, skeletal would be voluntary, cardiac and smooth are involuntary. So kind of know the characteristics of each one. Questions on those?
I just had a question. Was this video or this presentation of yours available in one of the links that you sent by chance? Or this is just something?
Yeah, I don't think so. But let me see. Let me see if I can find it. Because sometimes what I do is I record my in-person sessions. But I don't know if I did this one or not, because this one tends to be a little bit more simpler. So I may not have recorded this one for my in-class students, but I'll look, okay?
I like this one because actually this would have been really helpful it was a pretty tricky question for me on the last quiz regarding epithelial tissue. And there were like 6 choices that I had. I'm like, well, this is crazy. I'm like, all of these kind of fit. And I ended up missing it on the first time, but got it on the second time around, I think, based off of this. But this just helped me to zone into those characteristics of the epithelial tissue a lot better as far as what you all are actually looking for, or what they actually are, as opposed to some of the slides and the PowerPoints that I had read. So I like this diagram that you have here.
That's a great comment. So what I'll do is that any of these screenshots that I have, I'll provide them while you're studying them instead of just at the review session. So I'll thank you for that comment. I'll make sure that I find these and make it available to you, all in one link. That's a great comment though. That's good to know. Okay. So then for epithelial, make sure you know the characteristics, like it's avascular, it doesn't have any blood vessels, it's dense, compact. And also know its function and know how you name them based on number of layers as well as shape. So in terms of layers, it's simple if there's only one layer. And here are some examples of what the cells look like. So Can everyone hear me okay?
Hear you. Yep.
Okay. Sorry, I thought I went out for a little bit there. Okay. So let's look at this one right here. Do you see the one that I drew a red arrow to? Okay. So the key in figuring out whether it's one layer or not is to always find the basement membrane and the surface. Okay. So if you find the basement membrane, from the basement membrane, count upwards. And if you only see one cell, then it's simple. Because sometimes it could be upside down, it could be sideways. So if you always look for the basement membrane and the surface, that will always allow you to determine. So this would be an example of a squamous cell. What would this cell be an example of?
Cuboidal,
Cuboidal, excellent. And how about this one?
columnar,
Columnar. And you'll notice that columnar is always associated with what structure?
You mean anatomically?
Just what structure?
I mean tall and thin.
Oh, that's
But
the
that's why I asked,
structure
are you
of the
talking
cell
about?
itself. So what other structure is always associated with the columnar cells? It would be cilia. So if you pay attention, you'll find that there's always cilia associated with the columnar cells.
Got it. I
Okay.
did see that in the video. I don't think the video, the one I saw, didn't draw as much attention to that cilia, but I do remember seeing that on top of it.
Perfect. You may not need to know it necessarily now, but when we get to future chapters, we'll start to point that out. So that's perfect. Okay. So here are some examples of cells. So what would this be right here? The basement membrane or the free surface?
basement membrane,
Yep. And then this would be the free surface. So from the basement membrane to the free surface right here, how many layers do you count?
3,
Yeah, 3 to 4, right? And that's what makes it stratified. Okay. How about this round one? Is this the basement membrane or the free surface?
Basement membrane.
free surface.
Oh,
Perfect.
the one on the outside.
Yep, and this would be the free surface. So from
Yeah.
there you count up and you can see that there's at least 2
Oh,
layers right here. And that's
Got
what
it.
makes it stratified. Make sense?
Oh, wait, one more time, Professor. So the one at the bottom with the arrow, first arrow is the basement membrane?
Yes, sir.
Oh,
Always
That's
a
the
thicker,
trick.
is it more the thicker, more prominent line? Is that what you're looking for?
Yes. Yep. Okay.
Just a little note on some of the lab videos that, and if you were to look at my responders, you would see me like zooming in and squinting because some of those videos ended up being really small, especially for videos like this where you're trying to see where that basement membrane is to determine whether or not it's, you know, stratified or not. And there were a couple other instances. And just a note for the future for those videos, is it a way of putting those videos bigger so that one can see, because, you know, in Respondus, there's no zoom option. I can't like change my screen to look further, but that would be really helpful for
You
noticing
can
some of those.
actually. If you press
Oh, really?
control, yeah. If you press control plus, it zooms in on the images. Try that. Open the quiz.
Okay.
Yep. So if you open the quiz on Respondus lockdown, then press control plus, see if it zooms in or not. And
I
it has
will
worked
do
for
that
me.
next time. Okay, good to know, because I was just like, that's real tiny. I can't get
Yeah.
that.
Yeah,
Thank
yeah.
you.
Control plus.
Okay.
Yep. Okay. So then there are exceptions to that. And here's one exception called the pseudo-stratified columnar epithelium. So pseudo-stratified, pseudo meaning false, stratified meaning many layer. So technically the pseudo-stratified is a simple, because if you look, it looks like there's multiple layers, because here's the basement membrane, here's the free surface, and it looks like here's one cell or one nucleus, here's another nucleus. But if you peel them apart, it's actually just one layer. Do you notice that? They're just squeezed in. So that's why this exception to the rule of simple stratified is called pseudo-stratified columnar epithelium. Make sense?
That does make sense. And I just had another quick question. When it comes to the free surface, does that have any other type of term associated with it, like extracellular fluid or anything like that regarding these tissues?
Yeah, no, because extracellular fluid, it's a little tricky because anything on the outside of this, because these are cells,
Right.
right? So anything, here's the extracellular fluid, here's the extracellular fluid, here's the extracellular, here's the extracellular. Anything on the outside could be the extracellular. So I would not make that the same as the free surface. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay, no
Yeah.
problem.
Yep.
Professor, just a quick question.
Uh-huh.
So you said this last one is pseudo-stratified columnar?
Yes, sir.
So it's pseudo-stratified, meaning because there's multiple layers?
No.
Wait.
So pseudo
wait,
means fake. Let me write it out here. Pseudo stratified. Okay. Pseudo meaning false, stratified meaning many. It's not stratified. It's actually a simple, because it's technically only one layer. You see that? But it looks like there's more than one layer, and that's why it's called pseudo-stratified columnar epithelium. Okay.
Because the opposite is simple columnar, which is basically not everyone touches the apical surface, but they all touch the same basement membrane.
Yes. Yep. Okay. Then this next exception to the rule is transitional epithelium. Why is that an exception?
Because it's either compressed or not compressed?
Yeah, stretched or not stretched. So it doesn't follow, it can't be called squamous and it can't be called cuboidal because it depends on what condition it's under. And because it can change shape, it's called transitional epithelium. Does that make sense? Okay. Then you have the connective. Connective is the most difficult for students. But if you watch the video, I did make a video that kind of goes through and I provide my own study hints as to how I distinguish them. Like, for example, cartilage has these owl-looking eyes, very distinctive. Bone looks like a cut of a tree. Okay. And then I go through the rest as well. So make sure you watch that video. But essentially, it's divided into fibrous, which tends to have more fibers, loose, which has less fibers, and then the others. Under fibrous, you have areolar, reticular, and then you have dense. And under dense, you have dense regular and dense irregular. Under loose, you have adipose, blood. Under other, you have bone and cartilage. Okay, questions? Okay. Then on to the last one. You have the integumentary system. And I'm sorry, I know I'm out of time, but if you can hang in there, hang in there. If you can, I understand if you have to go. Okay. So the integumentary system, again, same thing. Make sure you know the structure as well as the function. This system does include skin, nails, and hair. Although I do focus mostly on skin, you are responsible for knowing nail and hair as well. So for skin functions, and this is the one that students have on quizzes that oftentimes they make a mistake. They think that skin includes both the cutaneous and the subcutaneous, but skin technically is just what?
Cutaneous.
Yeah, the cutaneous is skin, which means it's only the epidermis and the dermis. Okay. And then what's underneath skin will be the fat layer that we call the subcutaneous, and that's the hypodermis layer. That's the fat layer. Okay. Then make sure you understand the epidermis layer. And again, on the test, I can ask you to list the layers from deep to superficial, or I can ask you to list it from superficial to deep. So what's the key message on this one? Make sure you
Memorize and pay attention to detail.
make sure you read the test question. Okay, so make sure you read the test question. Oftentimes I get because if you don't pass the exam, I do a post-test evaluation with each student individually, and a lot of times it's like, oh shoot, I didn't read the question carefully, that's why I got it wrong. Okay, so read the question carefully, because oftentimes students know it, but they read it wrong. Okay, so just make sure you know the layers, make sure you know what cells you find in each layer, and the best way to learn this, guess what, is a cognitive map. Because why? It helps with recall. Okay. Then make sure you know the dermis, and then the membranes and glands. Okay. Questions on this chapter? Okay. So here's another drawing I made for my class, in-person class from hopefully you can see a little bit better. It's a little bit lighter and not as dark. But just pretty much go through the function of skin. 3 main functions: protects against the UV rays. How many of you remember what an acid mantle layer is? Acid mantle layer.
Is that when the skin kind of protects, there's no formation of like microbes because of that?
Yes, exactly. Because why? What's acidic? Because it has a lot of what?
Hydrogen.
Perfect. So many microbes cannot survive under acidic conditions. So knowing that, we don't want a lot of, there's some that can though, and those are the ones that you oftentimes find on skin. But a lot of the other ones can't handle acidic environments. So you develop an acid mantle layer on your skin, and that helps to prevent the growth of certain microbes on your skin. It also is a really nice physical barrier because you can see how thick it is. So the epidermis alone consists of the stratum corneum, lucidium, granulosium, spinosum, and bacilli. Okay, so all these layers there make your epidermis really nice and thick. And then you have the dermis layer, and then you have the subcutaneous or the hypodermis layer. Okay, and these are the characteristics. You can see the epidermis is the outermost, it's avascular, it's made up of stratified squamous epithelium, it's keratinized, it's densely packed, and that's what provides that physical barrier. Then for the dermis, it's vascular, it has connective tissue, which includes areolar, it has reticular layer, which includes the dense irregular, and it holds accessory organs. What's the hypodermis do? It's not part of skin, remember? Cutaneous membrane only includes the epidermis and the dermis. It does contain areolar as well as adipose, but mostly it's adipose. Okay. Other functions include that it synthesizes of skin, it synthesizes vitamin D, allows for sensation as well as thermoregulation. What else? It also allows for communication. It's the nonverbal kind, the facial expression. And then I went through each layer. All of this information you can get in the PowerPoint and script. But you can see that this makes it a little bit easier to remember, right? Because it's just highlighting kind of the big pictures, and it gives you a visual to really see where everything is. Okay, questions?
Professor, just a quick question on the dermis. So I know there's what is it? There's a papillary layer like on top, and then followed by like the reticular layer on the bottom. And then the epidermis and the dermis is separated by like this kind of like finger-like
Yes.
shape thing.
Yep.
Can you just talk about that just a little bit?
Yes. Oops. Hold on. Let me get out. Nope. So you are asking about right here. Do you see that?
Mhm.
So at the
Mhm.
end of the epidermis, you have what's called the epidermal ridges. They connect like a Legos or fingers to the dermis, and specifically that portion that it connects to is the dermal papilla. It's just the name of where they connect. So the epidermal ridges of the epidermis connects to the dermal papilla of the dermis.
Okay.
Okay. Other questions? All right.
Mhm.
So to conclude, should you prepare for the lab? Use the PDF, listen to the video, write the correct answer in your PDF, then use your PDF as a quiz. And I'm going to give you a specific example of that. So here's your PDF. What I would actually recommend you doing is actually writing, instead of writing down which is which, I would actually make it into a key. So I would go like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then here's the plasma membrane. So I would put 1 here. So you have the key here.
Oh, so it's like matching.
Exactly. And then on another piece of paper, cover this up. And then write down 1, 2, 3. Okay, so what's number 1? The plasma membrane. And the reason for that is because it's going to help you spell it. One, it's going to allow you to use these PDFs as you can reuse them as many times as you want as a quiz. And each time you take that quiz, it allows you to spell. You see?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay. Then what to study for a lecture, use the PowerPoints and the videos. And then how to study, write your notes, use cognitive maps, anything that's active. That's studying smart and not just reading, which is studying hard.